And till today, we have done over 1.5 million health checks. And I think as Apollo Hospital, we do a pretty good job doing health checks across the country in all formats, in clinics, in hospitals. And we have managed to diagnose several diseases in a very early stage and then offer to this patient complete cure. But when we met Dr. Krishnamurthy, and our collaboration is actually very short, our official collaboration is just a few months. When we met Dr. Krishnamurthy, and he offered to us this ability of looking at the patient to understand whether he has any cognitive difficulty, this is something that we had never thought about. What about his mental well-being? This is again something that we had never thought about. And so this was the birth of a very powerful collaboration between Bodhi Clinic and Apollo Hospitals using something as simple as a health check. So when there is collaboration that is meaningful and when there is a coming together of partners who complement each other, we found that there are new ways to enhance what we have already been delivering to the patient. So borrowing the best of what they have and putting it together with what Apollo does really well, we have come up with this new premium health check. When any new product is put on the market, there is always a latent period for people to get aware of it and for the adoption to rise. So I think in the next few months, we will see that all these concepts will get integrated into our health check programs. And we will now have a very powerful health check program that looks at a patient who walks into our health check facility in a much more holistic way. So this is just one example that I can offer of how working with his team, Dr. ESK's team, will actually enhance the value that we deliver. And it is not just about this. We know that today chronic illnesses and non-communicable diseases have taken root in our society and are fast displacing the infectious diseases. 15 years back or 20 years back, our visit to the doctor was typically a short-lived encounter. You felt sick, maybe you had fever, you felt unwell, you went to the doctor, he gave you some medicine, 3 days later you were fine. And that was how we remember our interactions with doctors. These were episodes, in most instances, far apart. Today, when we deal with this epidemic of chronic illness, diabetes, coronary artery disease, chronic kidney disease, now the relationship with your doctor is not an episodic one separated by months or years in between. This relationship is now a partnership. And the stronger the partnership, the better will be the outcome for the patient. So what do we mean when we say partnership? Whatever the doctor can offer you, and I was speaking to one of Dr. ESK's oldest patients, so I will take the liberty of quoting exactly what he said. He said 40% the doctor does for you. If he is a good diagnostician, he makes a good diagnosis, he puts you on the correct medicine, 40% he does. 40% the patient has to do, making sure you follow the advice, making sure you participate in the treatment, making sure you escalate whatever needs to be told to the doctor appropriately. So 40% comes from the doctor, 40% comes from the patient, and 20% you have to leave to the Almighty. I think that's a fair summary of the kind of partnerships we are building today. So we need to work together, doctor and patient, within the system to ensure that the patient gets the best possible outcomes. Because these are not diseases which can be cured. These are diseases which need to be managed. And in order to manage them effectively, we need new collaboration, we need more powerful collaboration, we need a transdisciplinary approach. This is a word I actually learned from Dr. ESK because he uses it very often. So a transdisciplinary approach is the need of the hour. Just one last point I'd like to make, and this approach has to start as early as possible. So if there is a problem, the earlier it is diagnosed, the better is going to be the outcome. So with these few words, I'd like to again compliment Dr. ESK and his team for putting together this Neuropsychiatry Roundtable. It's an absolute privilege for Apollo Hospital to associate with you, and I hope we are laying a foundation of a partnership that will get stronger as we go ahead. I'd like to thank all of you who've come here today to participate in the function, and above all the speakers for today's function, who Dr. Valsamma has traveled all the way from Sydney to be here with us, and so have our other speakers. So I think we will definitely benefit from their wisdom and their insight, and we will take something back from this function. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, dignitaries on the dais, and ladies and gentlemen. Really, I think Dr. Gagandeep Singh had a better way of talking, because after Dr. Sridhar's speech, it is very difficult to come onto the dais and speak. Such a powerful, such a nice communication of ideas. And it's my pleasure and privilege to be here. I thank Dr. Krishnamurthy for making me part of this roundtable curtain riser. Well, as Dr. Gagandeep was saying, and also as we were talking to Ludger in the evening, I think neuropsychiatry is one area where we need really to work, quite a bit, and we congratulate Dr. Krishnamurthy for doing this for quite some time now, before most of us have realized this. And we all know that there is nothing different from neurology and psychiatry. By and large, whatever we do, it's all the brain that decides what you want to do. And unfortunately, the misconceptions, I think misunderstandings that public have, of course, we also have contributed much to that misconceptions, making simple things more complicated, because most of the times we do understand that we say that control your thoughts, control your emotions, but we never tell that control your diabetes, control your hypertension on your own. Indirectly we tell the persons that it is your fault not to control your thoughts, it's your fault not to control your behavior, it's your thought not to control your emotions. I think this is a study of neuropsychiatry would give us a lot of insights into understanding why the people behave the way in which they behave. And I know it's a long way to go. As Dr. Sridhar said, that I think we need to work quite a bit in making it a holistic medicine, especially the mental health. The importance of mental health is not being given as much as it deserves to get. Because we all know that whatever decisions we take, whatever we do, it all depends on the mental health which we have. Why some people, in spite of the brilliance, don't succeed as much as somebody who is not so brilliant, for the simple reason that the capacity to judge is far greater than the people whose capacity to remember the lessons or recapitulate what they have read. So this is where I think the theories of neuropsychiatry or the mechanisms involved in various emotions, thoughts, behavior, judgments, intelligence, or everything what we do every day in and day out. So earlier we realized that the better it would be for the world. After all, as we see in every day-to-day day-to-day news, something is happening bad somewhere, crimes are happening somewhere, some anti-social elements are doing something. So these are all things which we need to work out. I know it's too big an area for a psychiatrist to do that. I think there are social scientists to do it, the psychologists to do it. But for the psychiatrists, we need to give the basic scientific information that how the brain works. Like, let us say, the addictions. We all know that it is not simple that I get addicted. Why I get addicted and why my friend is not getting addicted? There is something to do with my brain. My reward systems are different. Why I like masala dosa and somebody likes jalebi is entirely what your brain decides. After all, that reward system asks you to do it again and again and again. So the pleasure involved in doing some activity, the pleasure principles or the pleasure areas or the chemicals that are involved in generating the pleasure within the body, it all decides why I should do it again. Not everybody does that. Somebody is not interested in food, somebody is interested in clothes, somebody is interested in something else. That means the stimulus that gives the pleasure to the individual is different. So the area of pleasure might be the same in every brain, but what stimulates that area is different for me, different for you, different somebody else. Somebody enjoys reading, somebody enjoys music, somebody... I agree that over a period of time you tend to take the pleasure. Repeatedly you do it, most probably the pleasure gets reinforced, repeated. So these are all things which we need to study, and I think there is a lot of a journey to travel for neuropsychiatry. At present it looks a bit clumsy. Like the divisions which we have in psychiatry like schizophrenia, mania, depression, they may not be the categories which really they are. Perhaps a day should come where we have something like, I'm sure Dr. Ludger will be talking about, the autoimmunity, inflammations. So perhaps depending on some autoimmune mechanisms or inflammation or some area of the brain, they could influence the executive functions, they could influence the visceral functions, they could influence the emotional functions, they could influence the cognitive functions. So depending on which functions are affected by what type of mechanism, perhaps the expression of that would be depicted as an illness. Currently we are in a state where we do make categories like a few disorders, but unfortunately nature doesn't follow those categories. That's why you have some mood symptoms in schizophrenia, some schizophrenia symptoms in obsessive compulsive disorder, some obsessive compulsive symptoms in somewhere else. But for a lack of better classificatory system, for lack of better, nosological terms, we use this to communicate. There is nothing wrong in that, but we need to work on this further. I once again congratulate Dr. Krishnamurthy for making such a beautiful arrangements and also taking psychiatry at a higher level than what it really is today. And I hope Indian Psychiatric Society would take a leaf out of his book, would try to do whatever best we can do from that angle. And once again, I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity and wish this conference a grand success. Thank you.
I'm going to start off by saying how I ended up with neurodevelopmental disorders. I had an interest in children, and I thought I was going to be a pediatrician when I was training. And my sister is a pediatrician, I've got a family of pediatricians. But somewhere along the way when I was doing my internship, I realized that you do a lot of investigations, you figure out what's wrong with the child, and then by the time you start acting on it, there was a number of kids who we were not able to help significantly. That kind of really got me. And I thought, I can't do this as a career. Then I thought maybe I can do something to do with helping children with their mind. And I was very inspired to kind of get onto the bandwagon of mind is everything, that's a seat of your executive functioning, so I should be able to make a great job there. So I went and studied psychiatry, and there was a lot of neurology at NIMHANS, and the two came together. And the psychiatry I knew was brainless, and the neurology I knew was mindless. So I thought, oh, that's not going to help very much, is it? And then came the neurodevelopmental disorder idea, where there's a lot that you can do if you can catch those differences in development from a really early life. And I'll tell you how we might do that. Neurodevelopmental disorders, by and large, means that your brain is not developing in a typical way, and therefore you've got difficulties either with your cognition, which is your intelligence, your communication, the way you talk, your behavior, how you act, and your motor function, or how you walk, run, etc. And examples of neurodevelopmental disorders, most of you know, autism is very commonly very well known these days, speech disorders, learning disorders, etc. And it's quite common. Globally, neurodevelopmental disorders affect 52.9 million, and it accounts for 29.3 million years lived with disability. And a recent Indian study showed that 1 in 8 children aged 2 to 9 years, that's a lot of children if you think about it. 1 in 8 children are having a neurodevelopmental disorders. But if you start when the child is starting school to recognize there is a difference in the development, you've already missed the boat, because your brain is highly plastic. 90% of your brain development happens before the age of 5. So if you are identifying a child with a developmental problem when they start school, saying, oh, why is he or she not talking, or why is he or she not making friends, it's too late. So that's why we need to be really focusing a lot on the first 2,000 days. That's from pregnancy to the start of school. That's because when our brain is developing, what it's doing is making a lot of connections. And you can see in pregnancy that 36 weeks, it's ready to make those connections. By the time you're born, at birth, it's reaching out to make the connections. By 6 months, it's almost like a bush. And by 2 years, it's almost like a forest, because those connections have really formed. And all what you do after 3-4 years of age is select the ones you are using, consolidate it, and prune away the ones you are not using. For a child with a developmental problem, if you are only identifying them at the age of 4 or 5 or 6, what are you building on? Your building blocks are not there for you to build on. But if you started really early at 12, 18 months of age, you've got the maximum chance of making that connections as much as possible to connect well. And this is an example of brain development in terms of time. So the bottom line, if you look there, most of your vision, your hearing, your habitual ways of responding, your peer social skills, your emotional control, by the age of 3 or 4, it's mostly formed, and then it's just plateauing and consolidating. Except for those 4 lines, you continue to learn your algebra and maths into school years, so that's that line. But you can see how much it has already developed by 3, then you are consolidating a bit more. Peer skills, which again continue as you go into adolescence, into school years, symbolic language, and the language cognitive ability. Again, a peak has already happened by 3-4 years, and you are then building and consolidating a little bit of extras there. And the brain develops through use. For example, a child who is born perfectly programmed to walk, but if you keep that child in a cot with no taking out from the cot until the child is 2 years of age, is the child going to walk? No. That's because when you use parts of the brain, it forms the connections, and the motor system also in a similar way. If you haven't stepped out of the cot, then your motor system is not going to develop. So it's critically important that brain develops based on your experience and your use of those parts of the brain to make it connect. Genes are very important. The biology is very important. That determines when brain networks would form. But it's your experience that will allow you to shape it in a way that you want to go. So at birth, your brain has developed to a point that you're ready to absorb everything from the environment, use it through the experiences to form those connections. And those foundations of your healthy, sturdy, resilient brain is formed in that first 2,000 days. And here is the British cohort study. At the beginning, you are seeing the IQ at 22 months, and at the end, you are seeing the IQ at 10 years. The dark green are rich kids, and the light green are from low socioeconomic class. So when you see the top ones are high IQ kids at 22 months, the green ones are rich, the light green ones are from poor neighborhoods and households. Around 6 or 7 years of age, the rich kids who had a lower IQ at 22 months overtook the children who had a higher IQ but from the lower socioeconomic class. That's because of the experiences they get, the opportunities they get to develop their language, to cognition, and all those activities of the brain. And there is a significant vocabulary gap between rich and the poor. By age 3, those who are in a low-income family hear up to 30 million fewer words than children who are growing up in high-educated, high-income families. Because kids who are developing in families where your parents are laborers, they've had a tough day at work, they come back, prepare something, go to sleep. That's the most they can do. There's not a lot of stimulation. There's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of words that they are hearing. So in a way, that vocabulary gap comes really, really early, by 18 months, 2 years. The child hasn't even started school. And nowadays, parents think that it's all about school and giving them everything possible. But the nurturing care that you give, the stimulation you give, the singing with them, the sensory social routines that you have with them is priceless. And I would urge everyone to take home that message. If nothing you took home, that first 2,000 days and the stimulation and the experiences that they get are what's going to make that difference. So, coming on to one of the neurodevelopmental disorders as an example, socially, children with autism have poor eye contact, poor bonding, poor attachment, poor closeness, not making friends. They play by themselves while other kids are playing between them, saying, I'll be mommy, you be daddy, let's make a cup of tea. Make-believe play, symbolic play, interest in stories. Kids with autism or adults with autism are not interested in that interactional spell. They want to be self-absorbed in something that is internally stimulating but not interactional. So if you give them a toy car, instead of doing zzz, that's functional play. They will spin the wheel, they want to break it open, they are much more object-oriented or mechanically oriented. If you can start really, really early, you can make a lot of difference by making those connections. So if I see Dr. Krishnamurthy, his name sits in one part of my brain, where I know him, the context in which I know him in another part of the brain, the emotional connection, whether he has been good to me or bad to me in another part of the brain. But when I see him, all those areas of the brain need to come together for me to experience him as him. And then I say, hey, hello, how are you? Oh, hello, I didn't see you. So that simple meet and greet is a complex social brain network phenomenon, which we take for granted. But if you are struggling to make the emotional connection or who this person is, what that person means to me, then you have lost that connection. You have lost that social opportunity. So language or communication becomes a way in which we interact socially. And in kids with autism, it could be totally not there, or maybe some differences, or maybe that they've got well-developed speech, but the way they use it is different. And it's said that in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of geek syndrome, which is they are very mechanically minded. They want to be solving those problems, whereas we would be saying, oh, when is my break? When am I going to see my mate? But they can really get absorbed. You can make great nuclear physicists, as Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton have been said to have had these traits. So to a certain extent, that can be highly functional, but that's at the exclusion of the social, relational aspects of your life. So biology of the brain in autism is such that you're not interested in the external world. So if a chair came to me and said, let's play, I would say, go away, leave me alone. It's how they feel. They don't realize that others have got feelings, others have got let alone what those feelings are. So when you call the child or try to say, hey, look, you make a lot of these interactional, connectional stuff in those cooing and sensory social routines. But kids with autism are not interested. And they would scream and shout and saying, well, leave me alone. So with time, what happens is that parents and others leave them alone to do their little things or their little interests and be there. You should be doing the exact opposite. As early as possible, you should be catching them, identifying them, and giving them a lot of stimulation so that they can develop. And this is a great study from a very old study from Chicago. 3-year-old children were taken. 2 years they were given preschool program from low socioeconomic status, and after that did nothing. The children who got the intervention had much better educational status, higher achievement, on-time graduation, etc. So the return on investment, this is from the Heckman equation. He got the Nobel Prize in economics. $1 to $13 if you invest really early. But as you go later, that's where the politicians and the government would put money because they get their return on the ballot box. You need to wait a very long time to see the investment in the earlier years. But that's where, as a country, we should be going. But if we fail today's children, we are going to fail tomorrow's society. Thank you very much.